Look, I need to get this off my chest because everyone keeps acting like I'm the villain here. And honestly, I'm so tired of pretending I care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm Bethany. I'm 28. And yeah, my marriage just exploded in the most spectacular way possible. But here's the thing nobody wants to hear. Maybe it needed to happen. Everyone's so quick to point fingers at me. But where was all this concern when I was slowly dying inside a boring marriage to a man who couldn't even make me feel like a woman? It all started during what was supposed to be our relaxing family vacation. Cole, my husband of 5 years, had this brilliant idea to stay with his sister Jenna instead of going somewhere actually fun like I wanted. I suggested the beach, maybe somewhere with actual nightlife. But no, Cole's always worried about money, always talking about being responsible and saving for the future. So there we were, stuck in Jenna's suburban nightmare with her perfect little family and her judgmental looks every time I ordered another glass of wine at dinner. She's one of those women who thinks she's better than everyone because she bakes cookies from scratch and has her kids on some organic diet. Anyway, Jenna needed to borrow a laptop for some work thing, and Cole offered his old one. When they ran into technical problems, I offered my old USB drive to help with whatever computer nonsense they were dealing with. Cole got this weird look and asked if I was sure, like I was hiding state secrets or something. I just rolled my eyes and told him to stop being paranoid about everything. The man acts suspicious about the most innocent things, always asking where I've been or what I'm doing. But then when I actually need him to pay attention to me, he's glued to his phone or talking about work. The USB drive was actually Ryan's old one from back when we dated. I'd kept it for sentimental reasons. You know how it is when you have history with someone. There were old photos and memories on there, things that reminded me of a time when someone actually made me feel alive and wanted. But when I handed it to Cole, I genuinely forgot about the personal stuff on there. Looking back, maybe part of me wanted him to find something. Wanted him to finally see that other men had found me irresistible when he barely seems to notice I exist. When Cole started going through the drive and his whole demeanor changed, I knew immediately what he'd found. And you know what my first thought was? Not guilt, not embarrassment. I was angry, furious actually. Here I was trying to help his sister, and he's snooping through my personal files like some kind of detective. The look on his face was a mixture of hurt and disgust. And all I could think was, how dare he judge me for my past when he's never even tried to understand who I really am? I started preparing my defense before he even said anything. In my mind, I was already crafting the argument about how this was his fault for being nosy, how he had no right to judge me for things I did before we were even serious. Because that's the truth. Cole's never been confident enough to handle being with someone like me, someone who's experienced and knows what she wants. He's always been intimidated by the fact that I had a life before him. The confrontation happened that same night, and Cole did not disappoint in terms of being completely predictable. He came into our room with this serious expression and started asking me about what he'd found on the drive. Not just asking, interrogating really. He wanted to know about specific things he'd seen, specific acts that I'd done with Ryan that I'd never done with him, and the way he asked like he had some right to an explanation, like I owed him some detailed confession about my past relationship. I immediately went on the offensive because honestly what he was doing was creepy and invasive. I asked him, what kind of person watches intimate videos of their wife with another man? What kind of sick jealousy drives someone to sit there and analyze every detail like some kind of pervert? When I called him out for being a jealous creep, he got defensive and started talking about how hurt he was, how betrayed he felt. Betrayed by what? By the fact that I had a life before him. I told him straight up that he was shaming me, that he was trying to make me feel bad for being a sexual person before I met him. The specific things he brought up, the acts he'd seen me do with Ryan that I don't do with him. I mean, what did he expect me to say? With Ryan, everything felt natural and exciting because he was exciting. He made me want to be adventurous, made me want to explore and experiment. With Cole, those same things feel forced and uncomfortable because the energy is completely different. But I couldn't exactly explain that to Cole without destroying him completely. So I did what any smart woman would do. I flipped the script. I told him he was remembering things wrong, that his jealousy was making him paranoid and irrational. When he insisted he knew what he'd seen, I accused him of being obsessed with my past in an unhealthy way. The truth is, with Ryan, I felt like myself. I felt beautiful and desired and worth pursuing. Ryan made me feel like a goddess, like someone worth fighting for, worth being passionate about. Everything we did together felt like this amazing expression of how much he wanted me. With Cole, even our best moments feel routine and obligatory. He's never made me feel like I'm this irresistible woman who drives him crazy with desire. When Cole started getting emotional about not being good enough for me in bed, I lost my patience completely. I told him he was being dramatic, that he was making everything about himself instead of considering how his jealousy and insecurity were affecting me. I called him boring and vanilla because that's what he is. Ryan had this confidence, this natural dominance that made me want to submit to him. Cole has never had that energy, has never made me feel like he's this powerful, irresistible man who deserves my complete surrender. The whole fight escalated from there, with Cole getting more emotional and me getting more frustrated with his inability to take responsibility for his own shortcomings. I finally stormed out because I couldn't deal with his self-pity and his attempts to make me feel guilty for having standards. I immediately texted my friend Kayla and told her what was happening, how Cole was being controlling and judgmental about my past. The next few days were absolutely unbearable because Cole turned into this moody, passive-aggressive version of himself that made our entire vacation miserable. He would barely talk to me, would give me these cold looks, and would make these subtle digs about trust and honesty that were obviously directed at me. I decided I wasn't going to play into his victim narrative, so I doubled down on my position. I told him that my past relationships were none of his business, and that his obsession with them was unhealthy and controlling. What really bothered me was how Cole started treating our intimate moments like some kind of test. Every time we were together, I could feel him analyzing everything, comparing it to what he'd seen, looking for signs that I was holding back. It was completely unsexy and made me want to avoid physical intimacy altogether. I started pulling away from him physically because the whole situation had become so uncomfortable and loaded with his expectations. Around this time, I made a decision that I'm sure everyone's going to judge me for, but honestly, I don't care anymore. I reached out to Ryan, not because I was planning anything inappropriate, but because I needed to talk to someone who actually understood me, someone who remembered what I was like when I was truly happy and fulfilled. Cole's constant moodiness and passive-aggressive behavior were driving me crazy, and I needed perspective from someone who had actually seen the best version of me. Ryan was surprised to hear from me, but he was sweet about it, asked how I was doing, seemed genuinely interested in my life. We started texting back and forth, just casual conversation at first, but it felt so good to talk to someone who wasn't analyzing every word I said or looking for hidden meanings in everything. Ryan remembered me as this confident, exciting woman, and talking to him reminded me that I used to be that person before Cole slowly drained all the life out of me. When Cole noticed I was on my phone more, texting and seeming happier, he immediately became suspicious and started asking questions, more interrogations, more attempts to control and monitor what I was doing. I told him he was being paranoid and controlling, that I had every right to have friends and conversations that didn't include him. The conversations with Ryan started innocent enough, but they quickly reminded me of what it felt like to be truly appreciated by a man. He remembered specific things about me, things that had made me special to him, ways I'd made him feel that he'd never forgotten. He told me I'd been the most passionate, exciting woman he'd ever been with, that he'd been an idiot to let me go. And hearing that after years of feeling invisible and unappreciated in my marriage was like oxygen to someone who'd been suffocating. Ryan asked me if I was happy, really happy, and for the first time in years, I had to honestly think about that question. Was I happy, or was I just comfortable? The more I talked to Ryan, the more I realized that my marriage wasn't just stale, it was suffocating. Cole desired no companion. He sought merely a pleasant addition to his uneventful existence, someone who would seamlessly integrate into his vision of respectable suburban life without presenting any personal challenges or encouraging his self-improvement. When Cole brought up my clandestine texting, I experienced an unexpected surge of intense anger. It was baffling that this man, who had spent our entire getaway fixated on my past, making me feel remorse for actions taken years before we even met, now had the nerve to question my right to private communications with friends. I declared him controlling and possessive, asserting that his jealousy was becoming a significant issue within our marriage. My coffee meeting with Ryan was intended to be innocuous, simply two old acquaintances reconnecting in person after extensive digital correspondence. However, the instant I spotted him enter the small downtown cafe, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of genuine enthusiasm, a spark of true attraction. Ryan looked remarkably good. His smile upon seeing me made me feel like the most radiant woman in the vicinity. We conversed for hours, discussing everything and nothing, and it felt incredibly natural, effortless, and a stark contrast to the strained dialogues I'd been having with Cole. When Ryan proposed continuing our discussion over dinner, I recognized I was crossing a boundary, but frankly, I paid it no mind. For the first time in years, I felt like my authentic self, not merely Cole's wife, nor the responsible individual who invariably adhered to propriety, but Bethany, the woman who was once spontaneous and thrilling. Dinner evolved into drinks, and those drinks led to an extraordinary conversation about life, relationships, and aspirations we had both deferred. Ryan confided that ending our connection had been one of his most significant regrets, admitting he had never encountered someone who stimulated him intellectually and captivated him quite like I did. When Ryan suggested we adjourn to his residence to further our conversation, I accepted without reservation. What transpired there felt predestined, right in a manner that my marital life had not felt in years. Afterwards, lying with Ryan, I experienced an overwhelming sense of clarity. This was the missing element in my life, the standard to which I had been settling. This was what I deserved to feel daily. Guilt was absent. Instead, I felt awakened, as though I had been navigating my marriage in a stupor and had finally rediscovered what it meant to be truly conscious. The subsequent weeks felt like inhabiting a dual existence, and truthfully, it was the period I felt most vibrantly alive in years. I was seeing Ryan frequently, fabricating pretexts to leave the house, and devising elaborate narratives regarding my whereabouts and companions. Ryan and I were not merely engaged in an illicit affair, we were actively planning a shared future. He spoke enthusiastically about the multitude of experiences we could embark upon, the destinations we could explore, and the myriad ways we could construct a life that genuinely ignited our passions. During this interval, my demeanor toward Cole grew increasingly distant, and I noticed its impact on him, yet I lacked the inclination to care. He had been afforded 5 years to make me feel cherished, 5 years to embody the type of husband who inspired loyalty and devotion, and he had demonstrably failed. When Cole broached the subject of marital counseling, I nearly erupted in laughter. What could a therapist possibly achieve? Conjure a magical solution to suddenly make Cole engaging? I dismissed it as a futile expenditure of funds, asserting that our issues were too deeply rooted to be resolved by merely occupying an office discussing our emotions. The day Cole discovered my infidelity was, in fact, liberating, despite his attempts to frame it as a grand, dramatic confrontation. Ultimately, one of our mutual acquaintances observed me with Ryan and informed him. When Cole presented me with this information, he anticipated tears, denials, or some desperate effort to salvage our marriage. Instead, I experienced an immense sense of relief, knowing I could finally cease the pretense. I confessed everything without hesitation. Yes, I had been seeing Ryan. Yes, we had been intimate. Yes, I had been deceptive about my activities and associations. I then proceeded to articulate precisely why this had occurred, detailing the specific elements absent from our marriage that Ryan had been able to provide. I elucidated every instance where Cole had fallen short as a husband, every way he had made me feel unvalued and unfulfilled. Cole attempted to feign shock as if this revelation were entirely unforeseen. However, in all honesty, how could he be surprised? I plainly stated that Ryan valued me in ways Cole never had. That Ryan made me feel like the passionate, vibrant woman I had always been before I had suppressed that aspect of myself to conform to Cole's limitations. When Cole declared our marriage concluded, I felt nothing but sheer relief. At last, he was acknowledging the unspoken truth we both harbored, that our relationship had been defunct for years. I unequivocally stated my desire for a divorce, questioning why I would wish to remain married to someone incapable of eliciting my best qualities. I vacated our shared residence that very week, taking temporary lodging with Ryan while I contemplated my subsequent actions. Being in Ryan's environment, awakening beside someone who genuinely desired me, and planning our future together felt akin to stepping from a black and white film into vibrant color. This was the essence of how life was intended to feel. I began to share my experiences on social media, advocating for the prioritization of happiness over security, the refusal to accept less than one deserves, and the courage required to pursue genuine fulfillment. The divorce proceedings commenced immediately, and I was confident of securing an equitable settlement that would facilitate a fresh start with Ryan. During this period, Ryan and I began formulating concrete plans for our life together. We discussed relocating to a different city, one offering greater excitement and opportunities. Reflecting on this time, I harbor no regrets regarding my decisions. I had spent too many years embodying the persona Cole desired, rather than the woman I truly was. The moment I finally chose myself, prioritizing my own happiness above the expectations of others, it felt like a resurrection after years of near death. However, then events began to unravel in unforeseen ways. Approximately 3 months after I moved in with him, Ryan started to distance himself. Initially, I attributed it to work-related stress or the adjustment period of cohabitation. Yet he soon began remarking on the intensity of our relationship, suggesting I was expecting too much, too quickly, and that perhaps we had rushed into things without sufficient deliberation. One evening, Ryan returned home and simply blurted it out. He did not believe our relationship was working. He felt we had become caught up in the thrill of the affair without genuinely assessing our long-term compatibility. He confessed that the allure of our connection stemmed from its forbidden nature, the excitement of clandestine encounters. Now that we were navigating ordinary everyday life, the enchantment had dissipated. When I pressed him for a substantive explanation, Ryan's response was brutally honest. He admitted that being involved with a married woman had been exhilarating, but being with a divorced woman who had left her husband for him felt laden with excessive pressure and responsibility. He described my constant need for validation and attention as exhausting, deeming me too high maintenance and dramatic for a genuine partnership. Ryan informed me that he required me to leave, that he needed personal space, and that while we might remain friends, he could not contend with the intensity of a committed relationship with me. And just like that, everything I had sacrificed my marriage for vanished. I was incensed, utterly devastated, and completely taken aback by the rapid disintegration of it all. I had relinquished my marriage, my home, my stability, and my reputation, all for a man who had never truly intended to build a life with me. The divorce settlement proved disastrous. Cole's legal counsel possessed evidence of my affair, which consequently diminished my claim. I was compelled to relocate back to my parents' residence at the age of 28, an experience of profound humiliation. The most agonizing aspect was witnessing Cole's swift and successful progression. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I observed his flourishing without me. He had secured a promotion, commenced an exercise regimen, and appeared considerably happier and more self-assured than he had in years. Then, less than a year after our divorce was finalized, he began dating someone new. Observing Cole with his new girlfriend was agonizing. She possessed all the qualities I lacked: sweetness, simplicity, genuine supportiveness, the very essence of a woman content with building a quiet, stable life. And Cole's demeanor toward her was transformed. He was more attentive and romantic than he had ever been with me. It was as if he had become the husband I had always envisioned, but unfortunately, not for me. My subsequent romantic endeavors were a series of failures. The men I encountered online seemed to detect my desperation, my bitterness, and my utter lack of stability. I struggled to form connections in the manner I believed I deserved, failing to find anyone who truly appreciated my intensity and complexity as I craved. Yet even as my life crumbled around me and all that I had desired evaporated, I could not bring myself to admit my own missteps. Instead, I intensified my efforts to assign blame to everyone else. Cole for his mundanity, Ryan for his deception, and my friends for their insufficient support. It was far simpler to maintain the belief that the world was in error regarding me than to scrutinize whether my choices and expectations had been unreasonable. I began to assert to anyone who would listen that I had narrowly escaped a detrimental situation with Cole, that his new relationship underscored his inherent dullness and conventionality, and that I was better off without an individual incapable of appreciating a passionate, vibrant woman. I convinced myself that Ryan had done me a favor by revealing his true character before I invested further time in someone unworthy of me. Consequently, I remained entrenched in anger and resentment, firmly convinced that everyone else constituted the problem. Cole was too ordinary to recognize my worth. Ryan was too immature to embrace a genuine woman. My companions were far too ordinary to grasp the resolve of someone who pursued her own joy. 3 years onward, I remain under my parents' roof, employed in a position that scarcely covers my expenses, and I continue to observe Cole constructing the existence I previously dismissed, alongside a partner who appears entirely content with such aspirations. Rather than extracting lessons from this experience, my conviction persists that my initial perspective was entirely accurate. I still maintain that I merited more than Cole could offer. My search for fulfillment elsewhere during our marriage was justified. Prioritizing my personal happiness above societal expectations was the correct course of action. The unfortunate outcome does not invalidate my stance. It simply indicates that others struggled to coexist with an individual aware of her value and unwilling to concede. The issue resided not in my decisions, but in my perceived excessiveness for most men. My passion, intensity, and candid expression of desires and requirements in a partnership proved overwhelming. Men are drawn to the concept of being with someone like me, yet in practice, when confronted with fulfilling my expectations and mirroring my vitality, they consistently falter. Consequently, I find myself solitary. My life has indeed deviated from my original blueprint. However, I avoided a mundane, uninspired union with someone who undervalued me. Crucially, I opted for self-preservation, selecting my own contentment and refusing to diminish my essence to conform to another's restrictive definition of a spouse. If this portrayal casts me as the antagonist in others' narratives, at least I possess a clear understanding of my true identity.